Chapter 2. Martin Crane lounged in a colossal armchair, his right hand's fingers lightly brushing those of his left, listening intently. Richard Rizzo paced the room before his companion, his wild brown hair standing on end, speaking fiercely through clenched teeth around the stem of his smelly, battered briar pipe, waving a stack of papers. "Mart, we're stuck, at a complete standstill. If my brain wasn't made of solid blue mush, I'd have figured out a way to solve this problem by now, but I can't. That force field is enormous, man. Incredible. Its possibilities are unimaginable, and I'm so focused on it that I can't figure out how to use it intelligently. I can't even use it at all. By its very nature, it's impenetrable to any form of matter, no matter how it's applied. And this calculation here," he slapped the stack of papers containing his work, "shows that it must also be impenetrable to any wave, whether it's propagated through air, ether, or even cosmic rays. The barrier before us is a force field of immense power, so potent that we are rendered helpless in its presence. It frustrates me beyond measure. Imagine a wall of energy, intangible and yet capable of halting even a millikan ray that has traveled 100,000 light-years and passed through 27 feet of solid lead as though it were nothing. This is the challenge we face. But I am determined to test out the model, Mart. Let's get to work." "You're being foolish, Dick," Crane responded calmly, not moving from his spot. "You know better than anyone that you are dealing with the most concentrated form of energy the world has ever seen. It's possible that the force field can be generated, but—" "Possible? Nonsense," interrupted Rizzo. "It's as real as this stool." He kicked the piece of furniture across the room in frustration. "I could have shown it to you yesterday if you had let me." "Perhaps," Crane conceded. "But what if the force field is impenetrable not just to matter and waves, but also to gravity and magnetism? We know very little about the nature of these phenomena and the ether that they depend on. Your calculations may be comprehensive, but they cannot predict the effect of the force field on them. What if the force field nullifies all of these forces? Then what?" Rizzo scoffed. "What's the worst that could happen? Even if gravity is nullified, I would only rise slowly, following the Earth's rotation. I wouldn't shoot off into space like some people are claiming." "But what if you cannot use your power and become helpless if you release the force field?" Crane pressed. "We need to understand the fundamentals before we attempt even a small-scale experiment." Rizzo rolled his eyes. "You're being overly cautious, Mart. What's the worst that could happen? I would rise slowly, like a toy balloon." "Calculate it," Crane challenged. "Fine, but I bet it's slower than a toy balloon," Rizzo grumbled as he picked up his slide rule. "We can neglect the radial component of the Earth's orbital velocity for a first approximation, right?" "Correct." "Okay, let's see. The radius of rotation here in Washington is approximately 3,200 miles. The angular velocity is 15 degrees per hour. So the rise would be secant 15 less 1 times 3,200, right? The equation is secant equals 1 over cosine, which equals 1.035. Multiplying that by 0.35 times 30 gives us a speed of 212 miles per hour in the first hour. The velocity remains constant with respect to the sun, but accelerates from the point of departure. Rizzo suggests trying out a vacuum suit and carrying rations, using the same equipment from test flights before building Bismark 1, plus new equipment and a coil. Crane considers the safety of the plan and agrees it might be safe. The two men step out of the testing shed, with Rizzo wearing a fur, canvas, metal, and transparent silica vacuum suit, equipped with air tanks and heaters. He also wears a heavy leather harness with knobs, switches, dials, and other apparatus, with a small power bar rising above his helmet. Dorothy and Margaret watch as Rizzo snaps the release of his faceplate and explains that he's going to show them the zone of force, which he's been fixated on since their fight on Osnomi. "The way attractors and repellers work? I found something funny about how everything acted while the Mardenalians were bombarding them with a certain kind of wavelength. I finally figured out the exact ray that did it, and found out that if it is made strongly enough, it acts as if a repeller and attractor were working together, only so much stronger that nothing can get through the boundary. In fact, it's so strong that it cuts anything in two that's in the way. The funny thing is that there's nothing there at all, really. But the forces meeting there or something make it act as though something really important were there. See?" "Uh-huh," Margaret said doubtfully, just as Crane finished the final adjustments and moved toward them. A safe distance away from Rizzo, he turned and waved his hand. Instantly, Rizzo disappeared from view, and around the place where he had stood there appeared a shimmering globe some 20 feet in diameter, a globe apparently a perfect spherical mirror, which darted upward and toward the south. After a moment, the globe disappeared, and Rizzo was again seen. He was now standing upon a hemispherical mass of earth. He darted back toward the group upon the ground, while the mass of earth fell with a crash a quarter of a mile away. High above their heads, the mirror again encompassed Rizzo, and again shot upward and southward. This maneuver was repeated 5 times before Rizzo came down, landing easily in front of them and opening his helmet. "It's just what we thought it was, only worse," he reported tersely. "Can't do a thing with it. Gravitation won't work through it, bars won't, nothing will. And dark. Dark. Folks, you ain't never seen no darkness nor heard no silence. It scared me stiff." "Poor little boy, afraid of the dark," exclaimed Dorothy. "We saw absolute blackness in space." "Not like this, you didn't. I just saw absolute darkness and heard absolute silence for the first time in my life. I never imagined anything like it. Come on up with me and I'll show it to you." "No, you won't," his wife shrieked as she retreated toward Crane. "Some other time, perhaps." Rizzo removed the harness and glanced at the spot from which he had taken off, where now appeared a hemispherical hole in the ground. "Let's see what kind of tracks I left, Mart." And the 2 men bent over the depression. They saw with astonishment that the cut surface was perfectly smooth, with not even the slightest roughness or irregularity visible. Even the smallest loose grains of sand had been sheared in 2 along a mathematically exact hemispherical surface by the inconceivable force of the disintegrating copper bar. "Well, that sure wins the—" An alarm bell sounded. Without a glance around, Rizzo seized Dorothy and leaped into the testing shed. Dropping her unceremoniously to the floor, he stared through the telescope sight of an enormous ray generator, which had automatically aligned itself upon the distant point of liberation of intra-atomic energy that had caused the alarm to sound. With one hand on the switch, his face was cold and unyielding as he waited to confirm the identity of the approaching spacecraft before unleashing the full force of his generator upon it. "I knew Quinault would try again," he growled, straining to see the visitor, still over 200 miles away. "He's after you, Dot, and this time I won't just scare him off like last time. That fool's going to get what's coming to him. I can't see him with this small telescope, Mart. Line him up in the big one and let me know when you've got him." "I see him, Dick, but it's not Quinault's ship. It's made of transparent arenak, like the Condor. It seems impossible, but I believe it's the Condor," Mart replied. "Maybe it is, or maybe Quinault built or stole it, but I'm not taking any chances," Dick said. "It's the Condor, all right. I can see Dunark and Sitar myself now." The transparent vessel soon approached the field, and the 4 humans walked out to greet their Osnomian friends. Through the arenak walls, they could see Dunark, Kofedix of Kondal, at the controls, and Sitar, his young queen, lying in one of the seats near the wall. She tried to greet them, but her face was strained as if she was carrying a heavy burden. As they watched, Dunark put helmets on both himself and Sitar, opened one of the doors, and helped her towards the opening. "They can't come out, Dick," Dorothy exclaimed. "They'll freeze to death in 5 minutes without any clothes on." "You're right, and Sitar can't handle our gravity. I doubt Dunark can either," Rizzo said, rushing towards the vessel and motioning for the visitors to stay inside. But Dunark misunderstood and came out anyway. As he stepped out, he staggered as if under a great weight, and Sitar collapsed onto the frozen ground. Dunark struggled to help her, but the cold was too much for him, and he turned pale. Rizzo rushed forward and picked up Sitar in his arms. "Help Dunark back in, Mart," he ordered. "Girls, get in. We need to take these folks back up where they can survive." Rizzo closed the door, and everyone lay flat in their seats as Crane took the controls. With one notch of power, the cruiser shot up into the air, gaining altitude until Crane locked it in place with an anchoring attractor. "Gravitation here is approximately the same as it is upon Osnome," he said calmly. "Yes," Rizzo interjected, standing up and shedding clothing in all directions. "And I suggest we undress as far as the law allows, perhaps even farther. I never liked Osnomian ideas of comfortable warmth, but we can endure it by peeling down to bedrock." Sitar jumped up happily, completely restored, and the three women threw their arms around each other. "What a horrible, terrible, frightful world!" exclaimed Sitar, her eyes widening as she thought of her first experience with our Earth. "Much as I love you, I shall never dare try to visit you again. I have never been able to understand why you terrestrials wear what you call clothes, nor why you are so terribly, brutally strong. Now I really know. I will feel the utterly cold and savage embrace of that awful Earth of yours as long as I live." "Oh, it's not so bad, Sitar," Rizzo assured her over his shoulder. "All depends on where you were raised. We like it that way, and Osnum gives us the pip. But you poor fish," turning again to Dunark, "with all my brains inside your skull, you should have known what you were letting yourself in for." "That's true, after a fashion," Dunark admitted. "But your brain told me that Washington was hot. If I'd have thought to recalculate your actual Fahrenheit degrees into our loro. But that figure's only 47, and, while very cold, we could have endured it. Wait a minute, I'm getting it. You have what you call seasons. This, then, must be your winter, right? Right the first time. That's the way your brain works behind my pan, too. I could figure anything out all right after it happened, but hardly ever beforehand, so I guess I can't blame you much at that. But what I want to know is, how'd you get here? It would take more than my brains. You can't see our sun from anywhere near Osnome, even if you knew exactly where to look for it. Easy. Remember those wrecked instruments you threw out of Bismarck 1 when we built Bismarck 2? Having every minute detail of the configuration of Rizzo's brain engraved upon his own, Dunark spoke English in Rizzo's own characteristic, careless fashion. Only when thinking deeply or discussing abstruse matter did Rizzo employ the carefully selected and precise phrasing which he knew so well how to use. Well, none of them was beyond repair, and the juice was still on most of them. One was an object, compass bearing on the Earth. We simply fixed the bearings, put on some minor improvements, and here we are. "Let us all sit down and be comfortable," he continued, changing into the Kondalian tongue without a break. "And I will explain why we have come. We are in most desperate need of two things which you alone can supply. Salt and that strange metal, X. Salt I know you have in great abundance, but I know that you have very little of the metal." "Do you mean to say that you only have one compass on this planet?" asked the visitor. "That's correct. We only have one compass, but we have close to half a ton of the metal it's made of. You can have as much as you need," replied the local. "Even if I took all of it, which I wouldn't want to do, it still wouldn't be enough. We need at least 1 of your tons, and 2 would be even better." 2 tons! Good heavens! Are you planning to plate an entire fleet of battle cruisers? Exclaimed the local. More than that. We need to plate an area of copper that's roughly 10,000 square miles. In fact, the survival of our entire race depends on it, explained the visitor. He continued, as the 4 Earthlings stared at him in amazement. Shortly after you left Osnome, we were invaded by the inhabitants of the 3rd planet of our 14th sun. Luckily, they landed on Mardenal, and in less than 2 days, they wiped out every Osnomian on that half of the planet. They destroyed our grand fleet in one brief battle, and it was only the Condal and a few other ships like her that prevented them from crossing the ocean. Even with our full force of these vessels, we cannot defeat them. Our regular Condalian weapons are useless against them. We fired explosive copper charges at them that were so large they caused earthquakes all over Osnome, but it didn't seriously damage their defenses. Their offensive weapons are almost invincible. They have generators that burn Aranaka like it's paper and a series of deadly frequencies that only a copper-driven ray screen can block, but even that doesn't last long. How have you managed to survive until now? Asked Rizzo. They don't have anything like the Bismarck, and they don't know anything about intra-atomic energy. That's why their spaceships are of the rocket type, and they can only cross at the exact time of conjunction, or whatever you call it. Well, not exactly conjunction, since the 2 planets don't revolve around the same sun, but when they are closest together. Our solar system is so complex that unless the trips are timed exactly to the hour, the ships won't be able to land on Osnome. They'll be drawn aside and lost, or even drawn into the central sun. Although it may not have occurred to you, a little reflection will show that the inhabitants of all the central planets, such as Osnome, must be completely ignorant of astronomy and all the wonders of outer space. Before you arrived, we knew nothing beyond our own solar system, and very little of that. We only knew about the existence of a few of the closest planets that were bright enough to be seen in our continuous sunlight. As soon as you arrived, I shared your astronomical knowledge with a group of our top physicists and mathematicians. They have been tirelessly working from spaceships, close enough to recalculate observations for Osnome, but far enough away for perfect seeing, as you call it. But I don't know much about astronomy, protested Rizzo. Your knowledge of details may be incomplete, conceded Dunnock, but your understanding of the fundamentals is what we need most. Well, maybe you're right. I know the general theory of motion and studied some celestial mechanics, but I'm weak on advanced theory. That's all right. Our enemies have no knowledge of astronomy, which is why their rocket ships can only be launched at one favorable time. They don't know about the many planets and satellites that could throw off their course. Their war machinery requires material from their own planet, which is why they have stopped attacking and are holding their ground. But we have spaceships and intra-atomic energy, and we are constantly attacking with all our armament. If the next conjunction occurs, it means the end of the Condalian nation. What do you mean, if the next conjunction is allowed to occur? Asked Rizzo. Nobody can stop it, replied Dunnock. I am stopping it, Dunnock stated with grim purpose. We need vast quantities of salt and X. We are building abutments of arena on the first satellite of our 7th planet and on our 6th planet itself. We will cover them with plated active copper and install chronometers to throw the switches at precisely the right moment. We have calculated the exact times, places, and magnitudes of the forces to be used. We will throw the 6th planet out of its orbit and force the first satellite of the 7th planet out of that planet's influence. The two bodies will collide in such a way that they will meet the planet of our enemies in a head-on collision long before the next conjunction. The two bodies will have almost equal masses and opposite velocities, resulting in a fused or gaseous mass with no velocity that will fall directly into the 14th sun. Wouldn't it be easier to destroy it with an explosive copper bomb? Asked one. Easier, yes, but much more dangerous to the rest of our solar system, replied another. The collisions we are planning may have unknown effects, but an explosion big enough to destroy the planet would endanger the entire system. Our plan will allow the planet and one satellite to drop out quietly, and the other planets will adjust to the new conditions. The system will be practically unaffected, at least as far as we know. The group had different reactions to the plan. One was focused on the engineering aspects, another on the mathematics involved, and one was horrified at the thought of destroying an entire planet and its inhabitants. But one member reminded them that they were dealing with a war that was completely foreign to Earth's conceptions of mercy. One nation had to be destroyed, and it was up to them to decide which one to save. The decision was not easy, but they had to play it over a few times before coming to a conclusion. Dunnock has just informed us of their annihilation of the entire Mardinalians race in just 40 hours. Condal is likely to meet the same fate. War in space is no easy feat. Trust me, I've spent 30 years in Osnomian warfare, and I know what I'm talking about. Let's take a vote. Personally, I'm in favor of Osnome. Mart? Osnome. Dottie? Peggy? Both remained silent for some time. Then Dorothy turned to Margaret. You tell him, Peggy. We both feel the same way. Dick, you know that we wouldn't want the Condalians destroyed, but the other option is so terrible. Isn't there some other way out? I'm afraid not, but if there is any other possible way out, I'll do my best to help find it, he promised. The eyes have it. Dunnock, we'll travel to that X planet and load you up. Dunnock shook Rizzo's hand. Thanks, Dick, he said simply. But before you help me any further, I must tell you that, despite your status as Overlord of Osnome, my brain brother and wearer of the 7 discs, had you decided against me, nothing but my death could have kept me away from that salt and your X compass. Why, sure, assented Rizzo, surprised. Why not? Fair enough. Anybody would do the same, don't let that bother you. How is your supply of platinum? Asked Dunnock. Mighty low. We had about decided to hop over there after some. I want some of your textbooks on electricity and so on, too. I see you brought a load of platinum with you. Yes, a few 100 tons. We also brought along an assortment of books I knew you would be interested in. A box of radium, a few small bags of gems of various kinds, and some of our fabrics. Sitar thought your Carfadiro would like to have. While we are here, I would like to get some books on chemistry and some other things. We'll get you the Congressional Library if you want it, and anything else you think you'd like. Well, gang, let's go places and do things. What to do, Mart? We had better return to Earth, have the laborers unload the platinum, and load on the salt, books, and other things. Then both ships will go to the X planet, as we will each want compasses on it for future use. While we are loading, I should like to begin remodeling our instruments to make them something like these, with Dunark's permission. These instruments are wonders, Dick, vastly ahead of anything I've ever seen. Come and look at them if you want to see something really beautiful. Coming up. But say, Mart, while I think of it, we mustn't forget to install a zone of force apparatus on this boat, too. Even though we can't use it intelligently, it certainly would be a winner as a defense. We couldn't harm anyone with it, of course, but if we were ever in a losing battle, all we would have to do is wrap ourselves in it. They wouldn't be able to touch us. Nothing in the electromagnetic spectrum is twisted enough to penetrate it. That's the second good idea you've had since I've known you, Dickie. Dorothy smiled at Crane. Do you think he should be allowed to wander freely, Martin? That is a legitimate idea. We may need it, you never know. Even if we never find any other use for the force field, that one reason is enough to justify its installation. Yes, it would be for you, and I'm becoming quite the safety-first Simon myself, since they started attacking us. What about those instruments? The three men gathered around the instrument panel, and Dunark explained the changes he had made. To men like Rizzo and Crane, it was clear that they were examining an installation that embodied pure perfection of instrumental control. It was a system that only the Osnomians, the wonderful instrument makers, could have created. The new compasses were housed in Arenak cases after setting, and the housings were then emptied to the highest possible vacuum. Oscillation was created by a single, carefully standardized electrical impulse, instead of by the awkward finger touch Rizzo had used. The bearings, made of Arenak and Osnomian jewels, were as strong as truck axles, yet almost perfectly frictionless. I like them myself, admitted Dunark. Without a load, the needles will rotate freely for over 1,000 hours on the primary impulse, compared to a few minutes in the old type. And under load, they are thousands of times more sensitive. You're a brilliant genius, Ace, declared Rizzo enthusiastically. That compass is as far ahead of my model as the Bismark is ahead of Wright's first glider. The other instruments were equally impressive. Dunark had adopted the Perkins telephone system, but had improved it to the point where it was barely recognizable and could have almost unlimited range. Even the heavy, rapid-fire guns mounted in spherical bearings in the walls were aimed and fired by remote control from the panel. He had created fully automatic steering controls and meters and recorders for acceleration, velocity, distance, and flight angle. He had perfected a system of periscopic vision that allowed the pilot to see the entire outer surface of the shell and look in any direction without obstruction. "This one catches my eye too, Prince," Rizzo said as he sat down, swung a large concave disc in front of him, and experimented with levers and dials. "You certainly can't call this thing a periscope. It's no more a periscope than I am a polyp. When you look through this plate, it's better than looking out of a window. It covers more than the angle of vision, so you can't see anything but outside. For a second, I thought I was going to fall out. What do you call them, Dunark?" "Kraloto. That would be seeing plate in English." "Let's call it a visiplate," said Dunark. "That's a fine name. Mart, come take a look if you want to see a perfect set of lenses and prisms." Crane peered into the visiplate and was amazed. The ship had vanished, and he was looking straight down at the earth below him. "No signs of chromatic, spherical, or astigmatic aberration," he reported in astonishment. "The refracting system is invisible, as if there's nothing between the eye and the object. Dunark, have you perfected all of these things since we left Osnome? You're in a league of your own. I couldn't even copy them in a month, let alone invent them." "I didn't do it alone," Dunark replied. "The Society of Instrument Makers, of which I'm just one member, installed and tested over 100 systems. This one represents the best features of all the systems we tried. You don't need to copy them. I brought 2 complete sets for the Bismarck, as well as a dozen or so compasses. I thought you terrestrials might not have thought of these particular improvements, since you're not as familiar with complex instruments as we are." Crane and Rizzo spoke at the same time. "That was considerate of you, Dunark, and we're very grateful." That'll earn you 4 more palms on your croix de guerre, Ace. Thanks a lot, said Rizzo. Hey, Dick, called Dorothy from her seat by the wall. What about Sitar? If we're going down to the ground, what will happen to her? If she lies down and stays in the ship where it's warm, she'll be fine for the short time we're there, Dunark answered for his wife. I'll help as much as I can, but I don't know how much that'll be. It's not so bad lying down, Sitar agreed. I don't like your Earth much, but I can tolerate it for a little while. I have to, so why worry about it? That's the spirit, cheered Rizzo. And as for you, Dunark, you'll be lying down just like Sitar. If you run around too much down there where we live, you'll mess up your lights and liver, so you'll stay put and horizontal. We have enough people at the shop to unload this cargo in 3 hours, let alone load it. While they're doing that, we'll install the zone apparatus, put a compass on you, put one of yours on us, and then you can hop back up here where it's comfortable. As soon as we can get the Lark ready for the trip, we'll jump up here and be on our way. Is everything clear? Cut the rope, Mart. Let the old bucket drop.